Hello, everyone. I'm Shin from Canva, and today I'm going to talk about LLM evaluation to craft delightful content from diverse and messy input. First thing first, a little bit about myself. I am a machine learning engineer at Canva, working with AI for design. I have experience across multiple machine learning areas, including natural language processing, computer vision, and MLOps. And I've been working in the area with many startups as well as consultant companies. For those who is not familiar with Canva just yet, Canva is an online design platform aiming to enable all design for everyone across all ages. So, LLMs. When users talk about the output generated by large language models, especially the generated text during some creative product process, there are some of the usual responses. The generated summary makes sense. The poem it creates thus rhymes. The code it generates looks like it would work. But is the output actually good? I'm not sure. And we are quite familiar with engineering with LLMs and understand its strength as well as limitations. So with LLMs, what we get is the creativity, it's a subjective content, and also its non-deterministic character. And what we don't get, or LLM is not really about correctness, not really about objective, and not so much about deterministic. So due to its creativity and non-deterministic character, a question might be raised when using LLMs in engineering product is, how do we evaluate if it does what it's supposed to do? The process of using LLMs usually is that we have textual input, we feed it into LLMs with certain prompt instructions, and then we have some generative text as the output from the LLMs. This is the usual process of usage of LLM. However, the process of development with LLMs should be reversed. So where we should start is the last stop. We should set the success criteria and what good looks like and what we expect from the LLMs so that we can set, the goalpost and keep it there. Don't move it once we set it. And then once we set the goalpost, we will like to codify the success criteria by establishing measurable metrics against those criteria, so that we have a way to measure whether the LLM's output does what we expect. Once we establish the measurable metrics, and we also have the goalposts, and then we can get to work to perform the execution, to do prompt engineering and kind of tweak the prompt instruction to achieve the success criteria. So in Canva, we utilize LLMs to craft delightful content from our user input. And in one of our key recent feature, Magic Switch, where we transform users' designs. And here's an example. In Magic Switch, we are able to transform users' designs, such as a presentation, using my presentation of this talk as an example, and then convert it into or transform into a different form of design, such as a document or a summary of this presentation in this case. And when it comes to design input, they can be diverse and sometimes quite messy. So here are a few examples of like diverse and sometimes messy input. For example, a Instagram post design usually is quite succinct and short. So we only have like short input text. On the other hand, if the design is a whiteboard or a more like collaborative document, then we will also have or a graph that's showing an org chart. Then we will have the diverse input, such as certain unordered text, such as like a graph of a org chart. The text is kind of like not really following the our usual reading order. Or as I also touched on previously, if we have a whiteboard or certain kind of a collaborative design, what happened is that with this design, users just put lots of sticky notes, their thoughts, ideas, and all put it into one big document or big design, where the text is a bit lengthy and unstructured. So these are some of the examples of the diverse and messy input. And when I say delightful content, here are some examples. The output, for example, as in my previous slide, there's like a summary that we want to turn a certain design into a summary so that readers could just like read the summary and get a high level idea of what the design is about quickly. Or if we want to turn the design into a more communication form, such as an email that we can send it through to other readers, an email would be another delightful content that we can transform a design from. Or even with more kind of like fun or creative outputs, such as a song, we turn a design into a song. This would be another form of delightful content. So we utilize LLMs to convert the diverse and messy input of a design that's in my previous slide to something that's quite delightful and fun and aesthetic. But how do we define the delightfulness of the content? What we would like to do is to codify the delightfulness by establishing the output quality criteria. So as I mentioned before, we want to set the goalpost. And in our use case, we decided that the content and the format are the two main areas we would like to focus our quality on. And one way to set quality criteria in a more concrete manner is to ask questions. For example, here we have content and format quality criteria we want to focus on, and then we want to ask ourselves some questions regarding both content and format. For example, does the intent of the output meet the expectation in the content criteria, or does the output capture significant information from the input, or follow a certain correct semantic order, or does the content have the expected tone to suit the output document type or the output document with the proper audience? And on the format side, does the output content have the expected format consistently? And does the output content have the expected length? For example, an email would be short and succinct, versus while a song would be more like you have the verse and chorus, etc. So we want to set the goalpost by establishing the quality criteria. And once we have a clear idea on what output quality we are looking for, the next step is to codify the quality criteria into measurable metrics. And based on the questions we ask ourselves, we decided on these metrics in our use case. Information score essentially is to determine how much details of the input are preserved in the output. Intent score to measure how aligned the intent of the output and the content type is. Semantics order score to measure how closely the output is semantically matched the reading order of the input. Content tone score to determine if the output follows the expected content criteria. And the format score, similarly, to determine if the output follows the expected consistent format. And we also established certain criteria that is a bit more abstract and high level. For example, for the format criteria for email, here is in the criteria that we established. The email should have the format of a subject line, proper grading, concise content, appropriate call to action, and salutation. Once we define the success metrics, here's how to measure them. So we have a LLM input and an LLM output for a specific prompt. And then they are the input that would be fed into the evaluator, which will generate or calculate the scores for all the defined metrics. And this process will run through, this process is run through to directly compare each prompt pair at every time if we feel like the prompt engineering is needed. We run through this process to directly compare each prompt pairs to reflect, the prompt changes. And in terms of the evaluators, there are two types of evaluators we found it useful. One is the rule-based evaluator, and the other one is LLM. So for the small, straightforward criteria, a rule-based evaluator should be sufficient. And such as like let's say with a summary, summary should have a format of a title and some dot point. And this is a relatively objective and straightforward criteria where we can use regex to establish the rules and to calculate the scores. On the other hand, for those that are a bit more complex and abstract and higher level, LLMs are actually quite effective and efficient as an evaluator. For example, in my previous example on the email format, it's relatively tricky to establish those rules for the format of the email, such as a subject line, proper grading, concise content, call to action. Those things are more conceptual and more higher level rather than a more kind of like a lower level rule based criteria. So in this case, we can utilize LLMs to help us to do the evaluation. And here are the overview of the evaluator. So what we have for each LLM's output type, such as summary and email and song, that in my previous example, there's an evaluation criteria module to capture the relevant quality criteria. So again, as I mentioned, we focus on the format and content, and we define the criteria for these two areas. And on the other hand, for each metrics that we established, there's an evaluation metric scorer module to capture necessary information such as the output content, the output type, and the input to the LLM, etc., and score based on the criteria instructions that we established in the evaluation criteria module. So these are the high-level modules inside the evaluator for both the output types or the delightful content, as well as for the measurable metrics that we established. And here's an example for the email output type on the format score. So for the email output, in terms of the format criteria in my previous example, again, is that it should have all these elements inside the format, such as the subject line, proper grading, concise content, etc. And for the format metrics, here is how the metric scorer is defined. We utilize an LLM to give us a score, and here is the evaluation instruction for the LLM on the format metrics. So we would like the LLM to give us a score between 0 to 1 to determine if the output follows the criteria described here. And 0 means, it doesn't follow the criteria, while 1 means that it has, it follows all the criteria mentioned in this module, and it returns scores only. And this is an example of utilizing LLM as an evaluator to provide us score on the defined metrics. Okay, so step back, you might ask, but can we trust the scores generated by the LLMs? And at the beginning, my answer would be, I'm not sure, so I'd better verify that. So in order to ensure the LLM scoring is reliable, I validate the evaluator prior to performing the evaluation at scale. So what I have done is to adopt the ablation study idea. Essentially, I perform a ad hoc ablation score check. What it means is that I kind of like ripped some part of the output out from the LLM, so as to make the output worse than what is expected on purpose. And what I would like to see is that the score generated by the LLM for a particular metrics actually drops to reflect the actual expectation of the output. So what I did, there's like a few things a few ways to actually rip some parts out of the LLM's output to check the scores. For example, for the format score, I kind of change the output format to deliberately make it less desirable. Or for some kind of like information, I also remove partial information from the output to see whether the information score drops. Or with the outputs that we have a certain kind of like expected semantic reading order, I've swapped certain sections in the output and see whether the semantic order score drops. And also for the kind of like intent, I'll also see if I kind of like use an incorrect output types in the intent evaluation instruction and see whether the score drops. So this is kind of an ad hoc ablation score checks that I used to validate LLM as a trustworthy evaluator. Again, in the future, a more systematic check can be in place with a more rigorous kind of human in the loop process to calculate the correlation between the LLM evaluator scores versus the human label scores and make sure that they are aligned. So now that we established the LLM evaluator is trustworthy and it can be effective and efficient, what we want to do is to utilize this and have some evaluation results. So for each iteration of the prompt engineering and evaluation is run against the LLM test input-output pairs that we curated prior to compare the evaluation metrics for each specific criteria. So in this example, again, is the email format prompt change. The evaluation is run to compare the format metrics for email, and we can see that the format score increased significantly after some prompt adjustment, while the other metrics remain relatively the same. So we run this against all the LLM tests input and output many times, and then we aggregate the scores and we average it as the aggregated scores to put it here. So this, what we are seeing here essentially is the aggregated average scores for each metrics of the test data set. And this exercise achieves both the effectiveness to ensure that the prompt improvement for a specific metrics is effective. And in this case, it's the format score metrics. What we want to see is that it's significantly improved. While on the other hand, it also serves as a regression test. Like in software development, we have regression tests to make sure that the features that we introduce or certain changes that we introduced into the code base does not impact the overall system negatively. And similarly, the prompt change, we want to make sure that the prompt change does not impact other metrics negatively. So this is what we want to achieve during this evaluation process of effectiveness and as a regression test. And through this process of engineering and evaluating LLMs within product development, there are a few learnings that we picked up along the way. Firstly, is that it is important to define and codify expected output criteria first when working with LLMs, and then working backward to do prompt engineering. Secondly, converting expected output criteria to measurable metrics are crucial for evaluation and prompt engineering, because we have a clear metrics against the successful criteria, and then we set them there, and then we turn them into a measurable metrics. That way, it is very easy for us to do evaluation and comparison over and over, and in a relatively fast pace. And also, LLM is powerful, but it's easy to make mistakes. So evaluation on prompt changes served as a regression test for prompt engineering. And LLM itself is a quite effective tool to perform this kind of evaluation as a regression test, as I mentioned before. Last but not least, when product development involves certain creative process, such as working with LLMs, have generative output, it is best practice to adopt engineering techniques such as evaluation for concrete incremental improvement and systematic quality assurance to ensure the quality and the efficiency of the product. And this is what I was going to share with you all on the LLM evaluation for craft delightful content from diverse and messy input. Thank you. I will have a look at the chat and see whether there's any questions popping up. The first one is, any specific reason to use binary score only rather than wider score range like the Likert scale? That's a good question. Would like to clarify is that we did not use a binary score. I think it's not just 0 or 1. Essentially, it is between 0 and 1. So it's a bit more continuous. And the reason for that, kind of normalize between 0 and 1, is so that and his, they are at the same scale and then easy to aggregate, and kind of average, and to kind of do comparison between different iteration. I hope that answers the question. In terms of Likert scale, just to kind of briefly reading that, my understanding is it's probably not linear. The scale is probably not linear. Maybe there's a certain kind of a different scale factor. In the kind of that's actually a really good question. But in my kind of ablation ad hoc score checks, I did try to kind of rip apart away, and it seems like LLMs, or the LLM also gives a reason why the score is lower or why it gives a certain score. And based on its reasoning, I think a linear scale would actually serves the purpose, because based on the reason, it seems like it kind of the reasoning is quite linear in terms of the scoring based on the input fit into the evaluator. Sweet. The second question, what are some next steps or ideas to improve the evaluator models? That's an excellent question. There are a few areas that we can improve the evaluator models. The first thing is the several areas. The first one, as I mentioned in my slides, is probably the more rigorous kind of a system check to make sure the evaluators are valid, so that there might be a bit more systematic kind of quality assurance on the legitimacy of the evaluators itself, so that to make sure that it is reliable. That's the first thing. It's more like a precondition. The second thing, it's more on the scale. So ideally, because right now, because the features we just released recently, we probably don't have enough kind of user input to evaluate the LLMs at scale. So that is something that we would like to do, to evaluate at scale, and probably with a large amount of user input, as well as establish the way that we want to kind of like probably evaluate it more regular in a more regular base. We set up some periodic evaluation jobs, and then to put this into a more kind of like an ongoing base practice in an automatic way, and with a large amount of user input, as well as we run it across maybe one pair of user input and output, run it multiple times to make sure that we don't get any kind of abnormal or outlier result from the LLM. So to make sure the LLM's outputs are consistent and make sure our kind of like evaluation metrics scores are also consistent. And the third thing is the probably towards the more like also the scaling part, is that because right now we do kind of like prompt engineering in a more kind of a manual sense, while we utilize the evaluation in a more programmatic or automatic sense. However, if we kind of bring this at scale, what we would like to do also is to see whether we have a way to automatically identify prompt engineering opportunities and to kind of like evaluate to kind of like do prompt engineering improvement in a more automatic way. So such as like the some quite well-known practice out in the field, such as automatic prompt engineering. We utilize LLM at several steps to kind of first of all evaluate whether the existing prompt configurations are up to date or are the best. If not, if we see a certain metrics drop, then potentially we can also utilize the LLM to see whether it can provide more ideas or variations on the prompt and based on the evaluation scores, and then to kind of perform improvements and put it in the prompt, and then we could create this kind of a positive feedback loop, utilize LLM to do both evaluation and prompt engineering opportunities, identifying the opportunities. Hope that answers the questions. Yeah, so the other question coming in is, have you used this method to evaluate RAGs, so retrieval augmented generations, rather than directly evaluating LLMs? For example, for me in particular, the algorithm providing the context questions changes much more often than the underlying LLM. Do you find this system useful for finding regressions at that scale? That is an excellent question. So regarding RAGs, I think my understanding is a little bit on RAGs. My understanding is that if you have a certain questions or queries that you want to get answers from the LLMs, and what you can do is that instead of just putting that queries or questions into the LLMs and get answers, you can also kind of like utilize the existing external knowledge sources to kind of like get some context regarding the questions, and then feed over the questions, the query, and the context that you retrieve from external knowledge-based sources into the LLMs to make sure the LLMs will provide a more valid or more accurate answers. This is a great question. In our case, I think what we have right now is already kind of like served as a little bit on the in the practice in the realm of RAG. So essentially, what we have is like let's say users would like a certain type of the content, or as the transform design, and that served as a query, from the LLMs. On the other hand, we also have the user's design input, which is or the original user design input, and that probably is served as the context or the knowledge based sources, and then we feed both the query of a expected design output type with the design input as the context, and fit into LLMs to do the transformation. So I think that served as the practice of RAGs, and in terms of the whether we can further utilize this, I think that's probably something that we can also kind of like think a little bit deeper, but feels like we are already adopting this practice. And I think because this is more as I mentioned, probably this is more on towards the creative, subjective, and non-deterministic side. We are not kind of looking for a correct answer of the transform design from LLM. It is more like whether we can kind of provide a high quality design. So it has, we have certain kind of accuracy or expectation that we would like to see in the output, but not necessarily about how accurate or how kind of correct the design is. But we definitely kind of adopting the RAGs. I think that's a great point, to make sure that the design quality or the output quality is there. I hope that answers the question. I think that's all the questions so far in the chat. I would give a few more minutes. Excellent. I'll give a few more minutes and see whether there's more questions coming in before we wrap up here. Follow up. What about evaluating agent-based systems or systems that may make function calls? Yes, that's a good question. That's certainly something that probably we would like to look into in the future to further kind of expand this evaluation system. We do look into making kind of function calls to LLMs in other areas within Canva, more for kind of feature development, probably not specifically for the for this particular evaluation. But yeah, so I think that is something that we would look into as part of the improvement for this evaluation system. I hope that answers the last question, and I'm not seeing many questions coming in just yet, and I know that we are like 2 minutes past 10. If there are no more questions, then I might wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time to listen to my talk, and I hope you learned something and have some takeaways from this talk, and I hope the talk is delightful to you. Thank you so much. Have a good day.